Certainly we find the topic of threat hunting interesting. We talk a lot about it internally. We're lucky enough to get engaged in a lot of these activities with different organizations. Ian is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm really happy to have him here from Toronto. So we put together a presentation that we hope is useful to you guys if you're just embarking on the activity of threat hunting within your cybersecurity program, or if you're experienced hunters, hopefully we can provide a few tips and maybe ideas to help with your hunting. So let me get started. I thought I'd start this by posing the question of what is threat hunting? It seems like a simple question. Ian and I had the privilege of attending a threat hunting panel at RSA conference last April. And it was a really interesting panel. It was hosted by Anton from Gardner, and if you follow Anton on Twitter, he's a very interesting, opinionated fellow. But on this panel was a CISO from Google, the CISO from Telstra, telecom in Australia, and the CTO from CrowdStrike. And they asked this question as the opening question in the panel of what is threat hunting? And three, arguably some of the most mature organizations in the industry from a security perspective, none of them could actually agree on the same definition of threat hunting. It was really interesting. On one end of the spectrum, you had the belief that threat hunting could be, automated. You could leverage AI and machine learning to do threat hunting. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you had people believing that threat hunting is a purely human-driven process. While I believe it could be a combination of both, I thought I would level set and just say, between Ian and I, we believe it's a human-driven process. That could arguably be automated in some stages, but looking for incidents or weaknesses within your organization without prior knowledge of that attack that would otherwise circumvent your prevention and threat detection systems. So something to think about. I bet you if you ask the person next to you, what is threat hunting? You'll likely get a different answer of what you think threat hunting is.
Okay. Oh, how do I work this thing?
Big button at the top.
Oh, great. So boom, right into it. Low cards exchange principle. Just show of hands, who has heard of low cards? Yeah, James at the back. About 3 years ago, I started really myself hearing about threat hunting, and I always wondered what threat hunting was and how it differentiated itself from forensics. In my mind, they're one and the same. Forensics, yes, tends to be primarily reactive. There are instances where you use it for a proactive approach, but they're one and the same, and the principle still applies. Like low cards exchange principle is when two things come into contact of each other, you have an exchange of matter. And the idea is that similar to a crime scene, you have bloody fingerprints or you have mud through the crime scene. You take something, you always leave something behind. And this principle applies to the digital realm. For example, when you connect to a web server, somewhere that connection is logged. You have an FTP, there's evidence of you downloading a file. And even there's cases where it's not actually logged anywhere. It could be a piece of log entry that's fragmented memory, or it's in a temporary file. But you always leave something behind, principle. And the thing that I hear oftentimes in threat hunting is they can't find it. So the idea is that nothing is detectable. You just don't have the right information yet. Also, the other thing is in security, we tend to say, well, there is no such thing as 100% security. That's highly improbable or impossible. But you can have near 100% visibility by doing threat hunting. So why hunt? This is, I think, the question why most of you are here. Because it's proactive. I think most of us in this room can agree there's times in our life, especially in this industry, where we kind of feel like we're on the losing team, that the bad guys are always winning. So quite a few years ago, I started working at a bank and just had a Solaris box with a whole bunch of logs, and I just started looking through the logs and grepping things. And I was finding all sorts of evidence of malicious behavior or employee misuse just by grepping certain strings through the logs. And quickly realized that by threat hunting, it's much harder for the attacker to hide if you're actively looking for them. And you're also actively learning about your network. You're learning things that attackers, usually when they come onto your network and they attack you, first thing they do is enumerate, enumerate, enumerate. They know more about your network when they attack you than most IT groups. So it's much harder to hide when you know your environment. Lastly, the thing very quickly, when I was back at the bank, I was starting my threat hunting exercise, I suddenly realized that I was being invited to all these architect meetings. And it was because I knew more about the network than they did. Their network diagrams hadn't been updated in quite a while, and suddenly found myself as a thought leader, especially in the organization.
Yeah, when I started out as a security analyst, many years ago now, much less gray hair, I had a very narrow view of the world. I mean, my world was I could respond to the alerts and the tools and data that I had, and my view of the world was really focused on the data that I had coming into my security solutions. So I think, to Ian's point, one of the residual benefits to threat hunting is you actually close your infrastructure knowledge gap. So not only are you looking for threats on your network or looking for weaknesses or other things on your network, but you're actually discovering more about your network than you ever knew before. So it's closing that infrastructure knowledge gap, learning about either new areas on your network, could be additional assets on your network that you never knew were there, applications running on your network that you didn't know were there. So these are things that aren't necessarily feeding into your existing security tools and is a really valuable part of threat hunting. So not only the threat-centric part of it, but also the knowledge about what's in your infrastructure. Now, if you're building a threat hunting program and you have the buy-in from management and you're exploring how to start this, we'd highly recommend choosing a framework to basically structure your threat hunting program around. Now, a framework can provide a few different things for you. First, it can give you the repeatable steps in threat hunting, because as you're creating hypotheses and you're asking questions, you'd like to create repeatable steps, and you'd also be able to create a language that you can actually share in your team. And if you're sharing information between organizations, it's helpful to have a common language and consistency. Now, attackers have a large variety of methods they use to attack organizations, and there's a variety of reasons why they may be attacking your organization. And these steps that an attacker has to walk through to attack you, although the tools may be different, the elements and the steps they have to take to exploit your organization, gain persistence and foothold within your organization, either a command and control to take control of it, and then a way to exfiltrate data. These steps are very common between attackers. The tools may be different, but the steps are the same. And these roughly map to what we call the cyber kill chain. And there are a lot of different cyber kill chains available in the industry. There was originally Lockheed cyber kill chain. Gardner had their own cyber kill chain. The latest one, which we follow and a lot of the industry is now following, is MITRE cyber kill chain. So if you're looking at following a framework for threat hunting, I'd highly recommend checking out MITRE cyber kill chain. Now, a few of the benefits of all cyber kill chains, and I really like MITRE's layout, is they've laid out the cyber kill chain, and here are the elements that an attacker has to walk through, or observations an attacker has to walk through to basically compromise your organization. On the right here, it breaks down the high-level steps of, they have to gain persistence, they have to gain credential access, discovery, lateral movement. And within each of these, there's then a subset of different items saying, if you're looking for an attacker trying to gain persistence in your network, well, here's a list of a few dozen things you should be looking at in that phase where an attacker has to execute. Now, if you navigate to MITRE's website, and I've got the links at the bottom there, they've actually got a really cool navigator in that you can choose different threat groups, so APT, whatever number, or different pieces of malware, and MITRE has actually gone the extra step and highlighted the areas of the framework where if you're hunting for this threat group or this APT or this piece of malware, here are the different elements or objectives within the framework that you should be looking at. And these aren't signature-centric, so it's not IPs and hashes, it's more tools, tactics, procedures. So they're going to try to gain persistence in this area of the network or in this endpoint. And within, in the endpoint, maybe you should be looking in .bash or the history or different areas of your network. So highly recommend choosing a framework, really helpful when forming hypotheses and questions about what I'm going to hunt for. Now, before we get into the topic of what we should look for, the question often comes up is, how am I going to measure success? And it's very hard to quantify the value of security solutions. So if someone comes to you and go, we've invested in this tool, how much value am I getting out of it? It's very hard for us practitioners to usually assign a dollar amount or figures to that. They kind of give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So I tried to lay out a few metrics to, well, justify your existence as a threat hunter, and that you actually have some measurable outputs, not solely based on finding bad stuff within your network. When you begin threat hunting for the first time, you're likely going to encounter one of two scenarios. The first scenario is that you've never hunted before and you're going to find all kinds of bad stuff. And if you start uncovering incidents or bad stuff within your network, the first sort of short-term metrics is, well, document what types of incidents they are, the severity of those incidents, and the type of those incidents. And an additional, I think, equally important metric, not only in the number of bad things you find, is dwell time. So those incidents that you find, how long have they been in my network undetected before I found them? And that'll come in handy later, because this is a metric you can start gauging yourself across. Now, that's the first scenario, is you're hunting and you're finding bad stuff. The second scenario is that you're hunting and you're going to go months without finding anything. We're an organization of over 100,000 people. RSA and VMware and all these companies are now owned by Dell. And as part of our SOC, we have arguably some of the most mature hunters in the industry. We have access to all the tools that you can buy. If I look at our stats from a couple of years ago, we're uncovering maybe 10 incidents a year. So that's a large gap between the time that it takes when we're hunting and finding stuff. So we're not finding, something every hunting session. We're only finding, a handful a year. So how do I measure my output and success if I'm not basing my only metric on finding bad stuff? So I think a realistic goal is every time you go into a hunting session, you try to find one thing to improve your visibility. And improving visibility can mean a lot of different things. So it could be uncovering a vulnerability in one of your systems. It could be finding insecure business practices. So if you walk into an IT shop and say, hey, do you have any clear text FTP? And they're like, no, against policy. There's no clear text protocols in my network. I assure you, you're going to uncover stuff that's against policy. And this is stuff that increases your attack surface and makes you more vulnerable to attack. There's going to be new assets that you discover. So all this is useful information to start building your own threat intelligence about your organization. So these are things that I think are achievable. Try to find one thing within your network that either it's a weakness, it could be something that the users shouldn't be doing, but they are doing that is risky to the organization. It could be new areas of your network that are undiscovered, new applications. All this is useful for enhancing the visibility. And I think that's a realistic goal for every hunting session. Anything on it? No. Okay.
No. Well, it's the one thing I'll add to that is it's not necessarily just finding evil. I was recently at a customer that very quickly we realized that their Active Directory servers were public IP'd, protected by a very simple firewall that was blocking inbound but allowed everything outbound. And when I notified to them, their response was, well, our vendor set it up that way. So it wasn't necessarily they were compromised, but that was definitely a threat.
Now for long-term metrics, I think dwell time is a fantastic metric to start measuring success as you begin finding bad things within your network. So that initial, how long does it take for me to identify something that's been in my network? And ideally, that number should be getting shorter in time. So you're getting better and quicker at detecting things that make it past your prevention and detection systems. The residual effect is hopefully that should start reducing the response and investigation time in your other tools, whether it be your SIM or other threat detection tools. And security tool detection efficacy, I think, is one of the most important metrics to start tracking over time, because this actually resonates with your management and your organization as a whole. So as you're tracking incidents and finding bad things, are you consistently finding incidents that should have been detected by your intrusion detection tools or your prevention tools? So detection efficacy is, are my tools that I have in place performing as well as they should? Am I finding incidents that should have been stopped and caught at an earlier phase? And then using that information to then tune your detection systems and prevention systems. The other part of that is, if you're consistently coming across incidents that you have no way of detecting these things outside of threat hunting, these are things that you can use to build a good business case to start to buy a tool, to deploy, to detect that type of thing. Because if you're finding the same thing over and over, the same type of incident, that should probably be automated out of your threat hunting activities, and you should have a tool in place to start detecting that. So this is good information to start tracking, and then you can help reporting up into, we're finding things that we don't have anything in place to detect it. Maybe we can build a business case around a tool. And then documenting everything you find about your network and your infrastructure. So what is normal on your network? And then use your definition of normal to start tuning your detection and prevention systems, and it really turns into a feedback loop. And then a few benefits to the organization. So if your organization is, well, why do I need a threat hunting program? Well, we actually have the ability to now start detecting threats that make it past everything else I own. And interesting stats are certainly, if you start tracking dwell time, and that dwell time is reducing over time, that's an interesting stat to provide up to management, and tool detection efficacy can be really, really useful as well.
Yeah.
Now, before we start hunting, we need data. So data and visibility is very important to threat hunting. Is really the foundation of, if I'm going to look for stuff, well, I need a data set to look at. If my sole data set is a little bit of net flow coming from an outbound router and maybe some log-on, log-offs from my firewall, you likely don't have the right data and visibility in place to start threat hunting. So there's sort of a minimum level before you get into threat hunting. Now, you don't have to be a super mature organization with a dedicated threat hunting team. You just need really a way to collect one primary source of data before you could begin. Typically, it's a SIM. So these are key areas of log events that you should be bringing into a central solution. And that can be a primary source of data where you can begin your threat hunting if you're bringing in these sources of data. Secondary sources are if you're pulling in network capture as well, and endpoint information. So endpoint information could be from auto runs, it could be what processes are running, artifacts and inventory, and this all maps back to the framework that we were talking about earlier. If you're looking at that framework to form questions or hypotheses, these are the types of data that you'd want to be bringing in. And a few years ago, I would say this was in order of level of effort. It used to be that logs were the easiest thing to centrally collect, and then network and endpoint was kind of the hardest to collect this type of telemetry. With the advent of things like EDR, endpoint detection and response solutions, it can be just as easy to start at endpoint and gather that data now and bring it in, and same with network with NDR solutions. So at least get one primary source of data. Fine, there's likely something you're collecting in your organization now, so just tune that to start collecting the right amount of data in data sets. And I would say right data is key, because you don't want to just start dumping all data into this solution. You want a set of high quality data. And it's going to be an incredible amount of data.
Just wait for it. Just let it sink in.
No.
I don't know if there's any Star Trek fans in there. Big data. Anyway. Okay, thanks, Paul. So then the question is, well, where do we begin? We've collected all these primary sources of data. What next? We have an idea of a framework that we want to use. And the next part is creating your situational awareness. Knowing the lay of the land, how your network is set up, is configured, types of common traffic you see over it. Really, it's all about creating a baseline, normalizing your traffic. And I kid you not, even for a small network, this is probably going to be a 3 to 6 month effort of just constantly looking in your network. But eventually you get to the point where you're able to see the anomalies. They just stick out like a sore thumb. So things like going to, if you have an internal DevOps team, going to them and asking, say it's a HTTP web application, asking them what are the methods and the URIs that are commonly used by that application, and start whitelisting things. Just constantly going through all the applications, all the services on your network. Other thing to note is, don't necessarily start with an indicator of compromise. We're looking for threats, indicator of compromise. While threat intelligence has its place, you want to start more with a hypothesis. For example, if you were looking at data leaving your network, what's the exit points? And I've commonly gone to clients and asked that question. They said, oh, well, it's only this gateway. And then I find out there's a Rogers cable modem in some data center that a co-op student bridged the two networks over, and DHCP and all sorts of fun stuff happening. And data is going out a network that nobody knew about. So start with a hypothesis. Also, what's key is the KISS theory. Keep it simple, and don't necessarily start with a hypothesis of aliens attacking or any super elite malware. Just keep it simple. You want to do the triangle of pain?
If you've never seen the Pyramid of Pain, this has been out for a few years now. 2013, it was released by David Bianco. And I think this really illustrates well of why you should not start with a typical IOC. So if our goal as threat hunters is to be the most disruptive as possible to the attackers against our organization, the Pyramid of Pain illustrates at the very bottom is the items that are the least disruptive. So if I'm hunting for hashes or IP addresses and domains, that's not really all disruptive to an attacker. It's trivial to change a hash or an IP or a domain in their attack to an organization. So as threat hunters, we want to focus really on the top 3 tiers of the Pyramid of Pain. And this is difficult, because now you have to start going after more the behaviors of the attacker and the tools, tactics, and procedures. And again, this is where the framework can come into play, because it'll help you focus and ask your questions and hypothesis. So while IOCs can be helpful, and while threat reports can be helpful in looking for things in your network, try to stay away from the bottom of the Pyramid of Pain, because really it's not going to do you any good, because the attackers can adapt to that really quickly. Try to stay to the top of the Pyramid of Pain in your hunting activities.
So just show of hands, who has done threat hunting? Just want to know how far in the weeds I should go here. Okay, so I won't go too deep. One thing, pet peeve of mine, is organizations that don't typically do threat hunting on endpoints. Usually they rely on an IDS or an IPS, which is great. It will detect and block known indicators, but it doesn't give you process tracking. It just gives you a snapshot in time at best. And you can't see really what processes are running other processes. So when you're doing threat hunting, if you have this tool that is gathering this information, and out of the box, Windows doesn't enable this. There are ways to enable it. And it's now feeding into your primary sources of data. Things to look for are abnormal binary paths. One that I see a lot is things like SVC host, where the O is a 0, or SVC host in a NT user profile directory. And you're just looking at it in Task Manager, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that probably belongs. You Google SVC host, it says Microsoft. Okay, it's probably fine. But just not trusting things. Still going that further step, grabbing a hash of the executable. If you're starting out, throwing it up to virus total is probably fine. You want to be careful with that, of course. But just go that further mile and just validate everything you see. And again, it is quite a process, 3 to 6 months to get started, to start finding abnormal things on your network. But it's a worthy effort in the long run. Another one that I've seen is Adobe Photoshop. Probably some of you have used Adobe Photoshop. They have that great licensing system on the back end. When Photoshop starts, it fires another executable or a DLL that can do all sorts of extra stuff if you were to infect it with malware. Persistence. It's another means of persistence for an attacker. So every time Photoshop starts up, if you were to replace that license manager executable with, say, cmd.exe, you could now potentially fork a shell every time someone loads Photoshop. And if it's a critical application to your organization, every time some employee comes in, sits down at your computer, even loads up Outlook, you can do persistence with Outlook. That's potentially a means for persistence for an attacker. So another one is Internet Explorer has, some other browsers have browser helper objects, like the Bing toolbar. Those are ways for, you walk around your organization, most people are running a web browser, so persistence. Of course, you have some standard ones like scheduled tasks, won't get too much into. This is a good start, Windows log events to look for if you're looking in your SIM. Those numbers. I can't recommend it enough, the SANS Digital Forensics Incident Response posters. I always pay the $25, well worth it. Put it up in my cubicle. They just have a wealth of information. It's kind of like a run book or like a cheat sheet for doing forensics analysis on an endpoint.
Yeah, if you're looking at starting endpoint forensics analysis and threat hunting, download the framework from MITRE and go to that link and download this poster from SANS, because it provides just some run books and very common areas to look for things on your endpoint. So go grab it, it's free.
So next, moving on, especially with hunting on your network, having a tool, of course this is an RSA product that we use, but having a tool that will classify data. And why that's important is because if the data has been classified, it's a protocol that is known to internet. You can quickly just filter that out and say, okay, show me the other bucket. Show me any traffic that is not known. It's a quick way to look for encrypted, like covert channels of communication, especially even if you're hunting in the other bucket. There's other more advanced things like entropy that you can do. And then, of course, getting into, of course, the standard Tor traffic, IRC traffic, especially dealing with Cloudflare. They're now using HSTS with HTTP2 encrypted. That's another one to look for is if you're starting out threat hunting, low-hanging fruits are Cloudflare and Let's Encrypt SSL certificates. Pay very close attention to those. And then, of course, traffic over non-standard ports. Like, other than internal traffic, you probably don't want to see HTTP traffic going outbound to like a proxy port, 3128 or 8080. Of course, I'm just spouting off a lot of terms. One thing that I will note with threat hunting is it's about 90% research and about 10% actually hunting. You're just constantly finding stuff, and then you'll spend the rest of your day just pulling up the RFC for that protocol or just trying to figure out how it works.
Is SSH a valid protocol to use for corporate use?
Oh, yes. No.
Ian and I had this debate yesterday.
Yes.
Ian firmly believes that
SSH should be banned
that there is
from the
no
face of the
legitimate
internet.
corporate use for SSH within a network.
Yeah.
Change his mind.
There's some times when I go to a customer and I need a quick win. So I just go port 22. And I almost always see SSH out the corporate network to Rogers cable modem. It's like, that's what's going on there. And it almost always is some IT administrator saying, well, I want to, tunnel home, and I want to be able to work from home, and the VPN is just, it's too difficult to get on, right? Because it's almost always, some Rogers, Cogeco, whatever cable modem. So SSH should just be wiped. It's like there's no need for it. There's no need for the protocol. You can't do something else with a more secure means. But anyway, moving And so this graphic on the screen there, that kind of depicts your life as a threat hunter. It's a lot of staring at screens, 2 hours later, stretching, and then eventually I think that's Jackie Chan, I'm not sure on the screen, but the rage monster hits, and then finally you figure it out and you're like Freddie Mercury. But my point is, have a plan, have a hypothesis, but be ready to adapt. And you're going to change that hypothesis constantly. It's important to know what you're looking for, but have a backup plan. Have a plan B of something else. And just slowly over the time, just picking different indicators and different things that are interesting, and just start collecting information and document. Be flexible with your hypothesis is what I'm saying. The golden rule here is try harder. If you don't find it, try harder. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I'll go back to saying that the number of incidents we find every year, there's a lot of time spent hunting and not finding real incidents. So
I have a question.
don't get frustrated.
I like you in the last bullet. Document everything you're doing.
Yes.
Now, usually when you're doing that kind of work, you will go from one thing and then rabbit hole another thing and then rabbit hole another thing. How would you recommend to document going in all of those rabbit holes in a way that enhances comprehensive?
Well, I personally, because I did 12 years in forensics, I used the forensics note-taking method. I just timestamp everything, right? That's how I learned. I literally document everything. There's tons of tools. I personally use Kali Linux. There's some great note-keeping tools in Kali that allows you to search it very easily. I've seen some guys use Markdown as their language to be able to note take, but I have so many times gone into the boat where I've seen something, not written it down, and then 3 hours later realized that's the answer and not been able to go back and find it. So not to the level of tracking every mouse click, but just everything you see. Just there's I forget the name. The Snagit, I think, is the tool I use. And if I see something on the screen, I want to come back to it, I'll just hit print screen. It just stores a picture. Kali, you can just do a screen recording. And you can just rewind the tape and say, oh, there's the answer. That's what I saw.
Documentation is one of the most important things. Note-taking, I'm a big believer in just path of least resistance. If you have something in place right now in your team that you're sharing, start with that, whether it's an internal wiki. But as Ian said, document your hypothesis about the question you're asking, document the paths you've gone down. I explored this protocol, these were IPs and additional details, interesting stuff, screenshots. Just capture as much as you can and share it. I mean, there's certainly the proper way of recording things forensically that Ian can share. I'm of the opinion that if you're just starting out, just document everything you can in what you have, and then you can work towards a better system. But
It can take a long time to learn your network environment. You're starting, cold, and wonder what you thought of using some machine learning tools to baseline your network and what's normal, what's an anomaly.
I still think it's a manual process. I don't trust the artificial stuff yet, but it might be able to cut some of the noise out, but you don't know what else it's doing, potentially, what you may be missing. So I kind of put that in the same boat as starting with an indicator of compromise. Like, you don't know the full facts of that indicator, how it was established. Yeah. I prefer to set up whitelists for applications I know, and I just slowly just keep whittling down that unknown bucket, the percentage of it. Just keep digging into it and classifying data.
It's probably a good segue into the methodology
Well,
on
yes.
how we approach.
Thank you for the
threat
question.
hunting. Yes.
Hand over bag of money, no. The labyrinth. This is not to be confused with David Bowie, but this is something we created at RSA and the threat hunting team. And it was, we found very quickly that it was this rubber stamp method that we kept doing over and over. And this is called the labyrinth. So it starts with directionality. You're looking inbound or you're looking outbound. Then from there, you pivot to a service, such as HTTP, SSL, DNS, SSH, RDP, whatever, which I actually put SSH is bad. And the same goes for the opposite direction. You have service, outbound, FTP. I don't know why you would have FTP out to your network. It is a clear text protocol. Who knows who is listening out there? ICMP tunneling, it's probably bad. DNS, I don't know why you would allow DNS outside your network other than from your DNS servers. Some common sense things. And then, of course, under the service, you have, like HTTP, start looking for strange methods or strange sequences of methods, which I'll dig into in a second here.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for the one area to start, HTTP is probably the
Yes.
bucket that's going to
Yes.
provide the most value. Of course, you're all in organizations that claim to have only HTTPS, and there's no HTTP on the network. You're gonna find your initial wins in HTTP.
Yeah. Yeah. This is
Questions, sorry. Ian?
I use it all the time in my pen testing. Yeah, it's great. I'm an okay programmer. I know Python really well, PHP and .NET, and assembly is kind of 50%. But it's really easy to use the API in the OS you're exploiting. It's already there. So path of least resistance, and I can't afford the level of quality assurance Microsoft has put into my code, right? Like as a malware author, I don't want bugs in my code, right? So I'll just use what's already there. Usually it's quick to just fire up HTTP, or I've seen FTP. Encryption, I've seen things like ROT13, XOR, just really, really simple. And that's the KISS theory. I started out thinking, oh, well, it's, they're going to use military grade encryption from China and, all this weird and wacky stuff. But what I found predominantly is, not that I haven't seen it, because I've seen some weird stuff, but really, really simple, the less gears that can break, basically.
I think I'd agree that over the past 5 years, we've seen C2 encryption, or C2 moving to encrypted communications, for sure.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they haven't left tracks in other areas of HTTP, or there's a lot of other context around this that, I can't read the encrypted payload, but there's a lot happening around those sessions, especially if you have logs or network packet capture or endpoint data from earlier before the C2 started, when they're originally trying to gain persistence within your network. So if you're following the framework and the cyber kill chain, you're right. Maybe that far down the kill chain, you can't read the payload, but there's probably artifacts from earlier before they put it in that will likely be helpful.
There's a few projects that are digging into entropy with SSL, TLS fingerprinting, and really cool stuff.
Oh yeah, so if you, has anyone explored JA3 from Salesforce? So they're actually building detection signatures for detecting things within encrypted sort of SSL communication. So if you look up JA3 signatures, it's trying to provide intelligence and detection mechanisms in these sort of encrypted communications. Stuff that we do, because we have some access to some cool tools, is we can actually start looking at entropy as well. So you probably have a better definition of entropy than I do.
Well, yeah, the principle is if they've taken programs like Cobalt Strike or Rapid7 or Metasploit or whatever, and they said, okay, well, it's the same in the back end. It's using Ruby and whatever to establishes communication. But the fingerprint of that is always going to be, because it's the same program every time, right?
Yep.
So just fingerprinting that and adding that to a database and then doing some fuzzy logic to see if things match. And it's like, not 100% certainty, but it's, if you see the same thing over and over, scripting hitting your network, you can fingerprint it and say, oh, with relative like 50% certainty, that's probably the interpreter payload, right? So it's pretty cool.
What precautions do you take to stop yourself from your own
Yeah.
what advice do you give in your personal experience?
That's a talk on its own. Don't use VirusTotal. I don't know if anybody here is from VirusTotal. Don't use VirusTotal. Don't use any free online scanning platform. I've seen people that have leaked their own company's intellectual property thinking it was malicious and uploaded to VirusTotal, and now their IP's out there. That's fun. Don't use free tools. Isolate your network. So if use a VM. If you're analyzing Windows malware, use Linux, because you can't really infect yourself. If you want to use Ollie debug, you can still use an emulator in Linux, like Wine, to run Ollie debug. Also, in the VM, there's tools like inetsim that you can use to virtualize networks. So if you want to fire up an executable or a binary or something in your C, or you want to test some website, how it's working, you can just simulate google.com and you can fire things through it. My VM that I use for all my testing is always networking off. It's just isolated completely. So that's,
I have a funny
hopefully that
anecdote
answers your
around
question.
that.
Okay, go ahead.
Ian and I participated in a capture the flag a few years ago. I was on defense and Ian was on offense.
I don't know if you want to tell this story.
When we started the capture the flag, of course, I immediately dove into the data. I wanted to see what Ian and his team were doing, and I wanted to stop it. Ian targeted my tool, and I hadn't changed the root passwords of my defense tools I was using, and he locked me out
Rookie
of
mistake.
all of my tools. And my only recourse was to DDoS the router he was attaching to, so he couldn't perform any more activities. So anyways.
So services, what to look for, as I was saying, focus on one service. Thanks, Paul. Focus on one service at a time and define the normal traffic for that service on your network. If that service is not on your network, why is it there? You should never see it, right? But you were asking about HTTP. Here are some things with HTTP that what to look for. The first one, if you see that, that's pretty much an automated tool or a mobile app. You should never see a web browser or a client come to your web server and just start with a post. How does it know what form variables to post? And then followed by a get. A post to put, no get example. Base 64, I love this. If you want to start out and have some fun, just look for clear text HTTP, or if you're doing SSL decryption, HTTPS as well. And look for basic auth, because it's just a base 64 string in there, and you can just decrypt it and get the username and password. And then you can track that around your network. And then, of course, user agents. This is another quick filter that you can do. Most web browsers send Mozilla behind the scenes in the HTTP headers. You can just filter that out and say, okay, filter out all commodity browsers. Now, if the malware is really good, it'll spoof as one of those browsers, but you'll see things like curl, wget, autospider, and the list goes on and on and on. And those are things you want to start to dig into. Those are indicators. Or missing header. If you dig into the RFC for HTTP, it doesn't really say what headers have to be there, but there's a couple ones that, like length of the body should be accurate. So I've seen before, okay, thank you. I've seen before that the length is 0, but there's a body. So that's things to look at. And then before I get to the summary, the last one is files. This is great. Just show of hands, who here does full packet capture? Okay, just a few people. NetFlow? Okay, NetFlow. The rest is logs, I guess. Okay. So one thing that's great about packet capture is you can kind of, if you're doing full packet capture raw, you can just rewind the tape and you say, well, there was an executable that flew over my network to my endpoint, executed on my endpoint, but I need a copy of it. I want to see it, actual copy. Well, you can carve it out. So when you carve it out, if you look at the magic fingerprint of the file, and it's an executable, but it's renamed a JPEG to bypass some DLP platform, then that's kind of suspicious. The extension mismatch named off. And you want to add anything to that, or RAR files that are have a password on them?
No.
Small Java applets. There's a couple examples on the screen there. Any questions about that? No. Click. There we go. Summary.
Yeah. So summary, a few things to take away. Just acknowledge there's a gap. So having a champion that believes in the value of threat hunting and acknowledging that it's valuable to your organization is really step one. Enable the program. So do you have the data set that you need? And then do you have the people in place? And I'll argue that you don't need a super experienced malware reverse engineer to get started threat hunting. I would argue all you need is someone that derives pleasure from this problem and has some knowledge of your network. So it could be an IT admin, could be someone in DevOps, could be a security analyst. So it's not reserved for the chosen few. Anyone could get started as a threat hunter. I think one of our most successful threat hunters on our corporate side, his background is a truck driver. It can be anyone. Executing the program, so we showed you a few examples of downloading a framework to help you. Document everything, feed that back into your existing threat detection and response tools. Very helpful, and yeah, measure your outputs and try harder.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. If there's questions.